Hey, welcome to the second step of this mini course within the Extra Mile. Now that we have the blockout of our character, we're going to take those very basic shapes and we're going to concentrate on refining the transition between them so that they feel part of the same. So this lesson is all about sketching and sculpting within ZBrush. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so here is where we left off. And this second step actually has multiple steps within it, but they're very, very simple. So the first step within the second step, let's say step A, is to refine the blockout as it is, because it's a lot easier to move and manipulate these very low polygon pieces than a high-res mesh. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and select a different brush. I'm going to go ahead and filter by the letter M, and I'm going to go for this Move Topological. So the Move Topological respects the continuity of the topology. So that means if I increase my brush size, if I take this piece that it's on its own, or it's like a single object, I will be able to move it around without distorting anything else. Remember that every single piece that we created is actually an individual object. So we can also hold Control and Shift to access the selection tools and isolate it as well. So this Move Topological actually just simplifies the process. So the whole idea is just to make sure that the transitions between all of these shapes are working fine. So for example, let's go ahead and turn off the polyframe. I can go ahead and enable symmetry as well. And I can go ahead and start pushing these objects just so that they feel a bit more integrated. And one of the things that I really like about the move brushes in ZBrush is the AccuCurve. So if I go to the brush right here, let's go ahead and put this on the right-hand side. And let's clean this up a little bit. We can go to the brush palette, to the curve subpalette, and we can enable AccuCurve. Now, AccuCurve is going to give you this very pointy result. So let me just actually show you the before and after. Let's use the shoulders. So this is the pointy result that you get with AccuCurve. Without it, you get something that is not as pointy. Maybe that's not the best way of showing it. Let's use something like this. Something with a bit more geometry. There we go. So this one is kind of like a bit more rounded. And with AccuCurve, you will be able to get something that is a lot more pointy. So hopefully you can see the difference between this and this one right here. So I prefer, generally speaking, to have AccuCurve enabled for this process because it allows me to pull points and to pull corners a lot easier. But go ahead and play around with both options, with and without AccuCurve. So I'm going to increase my brush size and I'm going to start pushing this like so, just to integrate all of this. Right? Same thing with this one. Maybe we need a bit more volume here, and we can go ahead and scale the little sphere that we added here for the jaw. We can also push these some of these volumes here backwards a bit. And again, I'm just having a look at my reference to see that sort of a spiral sort of like fades nicely into the head in here. So I might just be able to push this one in. And again, don't worry about distorting things. We're gonna concentrate on adding a bit more of the transition in just a second. But this sort of like gives you an idea that this entire shape fades or joins the head in this way. All right, we can do the same thing here for the top. So you see, it's more of the same, very repetitive, but you start to get an idea of how things might actually work for this creature. I'm going to push this muscle here, which could work as the sternocleidomastoid muscle here for the neck, and I'm going to push this up as well. And let's go ahead and push this one in as well. So I can press the Alt key and push in, and that would do it based on the normals of the polygon. And then I can pull this one down. So, more of the same, but you see little by little, you start to get these really nice shapes. And we can also use large brushes as well to manipulate things a little bit faster. All right, so one thing that you notice here in my reference is that the closer that these things go to the center, the further it is from the center actually, or like from the inner center. So let's go ahead and push this out a bit and refine it like so. So I think that works nicely in there. All right. Now, another thing that you can use at this step is using the move brush, the normal move brush. So let's go ahead and filter by the letter M and use the move brush as well with AccuCurve. And the move brush doesn't respect that continuity of topology. So that one is a great one just to adjust the general volumes of the characters. I can push things forward a little bit. Maybe here for the chest, I can give it a bit more mass in this area. And of course, you can come back with the move topological and adjust things a bit more. So maybe let's go back with the move topological. We can push these muscles back a bit and connect them where the scapula of this character might be. All right, so you see, in terms of the practical steps, it's actually really simple. It's just using the Move Topological or the Move brush with AccuCurve and just adjusting the shape so that it feels more like a whole, like it's its own character and not just a bunch of separate pieces. Once again, take your time, enjoy this process. You can pause this lesson right now if you want to, but in order to speed up the process a little bit, I'm going to show you the resulting mesh after I adjusted them. Here we go. So this is my adjusted volumes. As you can see, it is very similar to what I just had. I spent a little bit more time figuring out how these pieces are going to integrate with each other, but that's about it. I also use the Move Topological brush to just sort of like add a bit of waviness to it so that it has a nice flow, and that's it. Once you have this ready, we're going to go ahead and Dynamesh this character and start working on the transitions. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and collapse this, or actually get rid of the brush panel here. And I'm going to scroll down to the Dynamesh. By the way, I have two subtools because this is the previous one, and then I just duplicated and worked on the adjustment, but it is exactly the same thing. You can do the same thing as well if you want to kind of like keep track of what you're doing. Just duplicate this mesh, hide it, and then work on the second one. Now, let's go ahead and open up the Geometry subpalette. And let's open up the Dynamesh palette. Now, I'm going to go ahead and reduce the Dynamesh to something like 32. And let's go ahead and click on Dynamesh. Now, the size of these polygons, let's turn on Polyframe. As you can see, this is a very low mesh, but that's totally fine. There are only two things that I want to mention for this kind of like second step within the second step, or step B. The first one is the resolution or the size of these polygons that you see here. That's going to be dependent on the size of your object. So if you have an object, a big object like so, and then you redynamesh at 32, it's going to be, the size of the polygons is still going to be 32, but because you have a bigger object, then it looks like you have a lot more resolution. The same thing goes the other way around. So if you have a very tiny object, because that's probably going to be different from what I have here, right? And I do the Dynamesh again at 32, now we have something that basically we cannot work with. So be aware of that the resolution really depends on the size of your object. So if 32 is not giving you something that you like, you can just go ahead and change the resolution. Now let's go ahead and undo that, because the other thing that is important to keep in mind is that at this point I will go ahead and separate some of the pieces that I want to keep on their own. So if I go ahead and Dynamesh this, that's actually too much. Let's go ahead and set it to 32 again. Dynamesh this. You see that the eyes, and if I smooth with the Shift key, the eyes are now just part of the same object. They're kind of like fused together. And I don't want that. I want to be able to keep those separate. So let's undo all of that. Let's go ahead and bring in the polyframe. I'm going to hold Control and Shift and select the eyes. And that basically isolates them. And if we go to the subtool subpalette here, let's open this one up. We can go to the split section here and split hidden. So that is going to create a couple of meshes. It's going to create the one that we can see and the one that we don't see, which is the rest of the object. So this is the one that I want to Dynamesh, and that way I can keep my eyes separate. So let's go to Dynamesh again. And I think I'm going to go for 64 in resolution. Again, play around with this and see what you get. I would just recommend to keep it low. Maybe this is a little bit too low. Let's go for 128, which is the default anyway. All right, if I turn on the polyframe, so that is not too bad. I think it's a little bit too much for this step, but I think we can just work with it. All right, so you see that after Dynameshing this, obviously everything gets combined together, and we have these very distinctive pieces, or crevices that are obviously left out from the blockout stage. So what I want to do now is introduce you to a couple of tools. So the first one is obviously the smooth brush that lives within the Shift key, this one right here, and that is going to allow you to smooth everything out really quickly and very easily. Now be careful with this one, because we want to maintain some of these volumes that we spend time creating, and we don't want to override them too much. Now let's go ahead and undo that. And the other tool that I want to use is the Clay Builder brush. So I'm going to click on Brush, and I'm going to filter by the letter C, and I'm going to go for Clay Builder. Now, the Clay Builder brush, by default, it allows you to create these pieces of clay that look really nice, as you can see, to build up clay. But in my opinion, having these extra jagged edges, it sort of delays the process of refinement a little bit. So one thing that I like to do is go to the stroke palette and open up the modifiers. And here at the bottom, you see we have this roll. I like to enable roll so that ZBrush rolls the alpha that this brush uses, and then change the roll to something like 6. All right, so with those very simple changes, roll on and roll distance of 6, we have something that looks a lot smoother than before. So that is the only thing that I want to do. All right, so now that we have this, I'm going to go ahead and start holding the Shift key and smooth all of these pieces. And the entire purpose of this kind of like step B within the second step is to figure out a way that we can transition between all of these block out into something that looks a bit more cohesive. So I'm just pressing softly in certain areas. And I'm also want to remove that sort of like blocky, faceted part of the polygons that, you know, that is just the way that it is going to be when you use low poly meshes like I did before. But you see, it's not that hard really. All right, let's concentrate on this area here at the top as well. And you see that bit by bit, because we had a very solid block out, something that provides us with the enough volumes, you know, it starts to come alive really, the character. Let's go ahead and do it here at the back as well, so we can press a little bit harder. So far, all I've done is just smooth everything out. And, you know, we can increase the resolution, but that's something that we'll go for later on. All right, so this is the first pass, just to smooth everything out, but you can see, you still see a little bit of the volumes. And what I want to do now is use the clay brush to sort of refine the transition. So just think about, let's say, this area right here, right? And how these flaps sort of like connect with it. So I'm going to start adding a little bit of you know, clay around it, and also here as well. And then we can just like extend these volumes a little bit towards the bottom as well. And then we can use the smooth brush to refine it. Now, another thing that you can do about this brush, if you want to do like longer strokes, obviously I'm just been doing these very, very small strokes. But if I do a long one, you see that it kind of like creates this gap. That's obviously something that you don't want when you're creating a long stroke like that. And that is because of the roll that I enable. Now let's go ahead and undo that. Let's go to the stroke palette and turn off this roll. But we keep the roll distance anyway, and that will give you kind of like the same result, but now you have a continuous stroke, just in case. All right, so maybe this is kind of like the best you know, default options anyway. So you see, it's just adding a little bit of volume. For example, here you see everything looks a bit bumpy or lumpy. So I'm going to increase my brush size and add a bit of volume here just to connect that transition, work on that a little bit more. And that is the whole point of this exercise, or this step, right? It's just to work on the transition between the volumes and the shapes that we had established, constantly using the smooth brush and essentially refine everything so that it feels, you know, that it's part of the same. And I know I keep saying that you know, refining things to make it feel part of the same, and it could be a bit of an abstract concept at this time, but the practical step and the what I'm showing you in terms of the workflow, that's what is going to get you there. Just bit by bit, refining everything, connecting bits and pieces, and overall, when you get to a point, for example, if you look at this part right here, you're going to get to a point that you can decide, right, I'm going to increase or push this jaw, or like the bone of the jaw a little bit back, and that way I have something like this. I'm going to smooth that out, and it's still, you know, part of the refinement process and figuring out kind of like the transition. So that's the idea of this step. All right. So as you can see, it is more of the same, very repetitive, just using the clay brush with the settings that I just showed you. Probably you don't need to use the roll. This is just a personal thing, but just leave it at roll distance of 6, and that will be more than enough, and the smooth brush. So once again, just to move a little bit faster, I went ahead and refined those transitions, and this is the result. All right, so as you can see, very simple stuff. I just went through the entire process of refining it, and there's a little bit more of a visible strokes in here, but those are not details. They are just the difference between the different strokes. I just use kind of like the same sort of direction like that, and then smooth everything out. And that's kind of like what it gives me in case you want to replicate the same thing. It's kind of like a suggestion of the fibers of the pectorials, for example. Another thing that you notice is that I increase the Dynamesh resolution. That is just so that I can define some of these crevices. And to define some of these crevices, I use the Damp Standard brush. So let's go ahead and introduce that one right here. Let's filter by the letter D and go to Damp Standard brush. And this one basically cuts through the model, and you know, it sharpens up that crevice. So that is the one that I would use in areas like the mouth, for example, to refine that, and maybe add a suggestion of like large folds like that, but we're gonna do that in the next step. So all you need to care about right now for this sort of like second step in general is to have a sketch that looks polished, and for the most part, it kind of like looks like the like the reference, and not just a bunch of separate geometrical shapes. All right, so just make sure that you spend the time refining the transitions for your sketch, and in general that it looks like a whole piece, not just a bunch of different pieces. One thing that I would suggest as well is that if for some reason you see certain areas that need to be tweaked in terms of the general volumes, we can go ahead and use something like the move brush with a very large brush size and just adjust little things like so. Just make sure that the volumes are correct. Maybe pushing things forward a tiny bit. So this is the time to do this type of changes in here before we go into the refinement and the details. And to be honest, this is something that I would prefer to do during the blockout stage, just so that I have the volumes blocked out in a way that works. But that doesn't mean that you're limited at this stage to just stick with that. If for some reason you wanna go for something else, maybe exaggerate the forehead even more, or push the jaw as well, explore designs like so, you can totally do so. Just make sure that they kind of like feel part of the same. That's the main thing. All right, I'm gonna undo that because that was just an example, but that is the idea with this step. So I'm gonna leave this lesson here, and in the next one, we're gonna retopologize everything, project the sketch, and start working on the polishing of the surface and the details. All right, I'll see you there.